Good afternoon. After going through a kind of a tumultuous period, everything is not always puppy dogs, lollipops, and sunshine. Sometimes we go through some darker days, uh, and darker in the sense that, of course, not the lack of light, but darkness in the sense that the lessons, the messages, the process that you're going through seems counterproductive, counterintuitive. I talk about I always want to be inclusive, to include one and all. Because after all, we're in this together. I am you and you are me. But the last few weeks, I've had to, and this is why I use darker times, because it's been, I don't want to say counterintuitive, because for me there's no such thing. Intuition is what it is, and it's always with me, and nothing goes against. How can anything go against that which just simply is intuition? But counterintuitive in the sense that I just mentioned about being exclusive, excluding, ignoring, focusing within. I talked about selfish enlightenment, and then I followed it up with no words but my own. And although I felt that I had to share those in those teachings because that's what was going on with me, I always seek to be authentic. I share what I'm experiencing at the time. And I always come back to a comment. My common theme is that things aren't always as they seem. That should come as no surprise to most of you. But the idea of being in awakened state, abiding state, doesn't preclude your personality, first and foremost. It's always there. But it doesn't preclude that everything will just be smooth. There's some bumps along the way, and depending how the bumps can become minimized if you're less resistant. And I try to be less resistant. But some things, it just seems to fly in the face of, I'm always talking about trying to eliminate separation and division. But then I talk about putting everything aside, putting everything, the rest of what's going on in the world, put it in the background. Put it on an equal footing with the monkey mind, that continual blathering. Just noise. And you can even look for white noise, which will cancel out the noise, the background noises that are part of our daily existence. So this inward, this kind of withdrawal, I found myself limiting contact because I was going through, and still continue to be going through, a pretty significant evolution. And the duration, of course, is indeterminate. It will be what it'll be. But already I see myself, as I woke up this morning, I woke up to the image of myself sitting on the riverbank. And a riverbank is a very, very common spiritual image to sit and watch and appreciate that the water, as long as it's moving, and that's what makes up a river, isn't it? Moving water, a certain size to distinguish between a creek, a stream, a river. But a substantial amount of water that's moving past. And the point being, or one of the big takeaways from that, is the ever-changing nature. The water is never the same. So this river, what made it unique is that in addition to the obvious that is constantly changing, it's without end. This river is in absolutely no danger of drying up. And I saw it as a source. I was experiencing it this morning as a source of everything, of the source of all joy, of the source of all love, of the source of all spirit, being, existence. This endless flow. And of course, or maybe not of course, no, maybe it's not obvious, but this experience, rather than making me seem less relevant, less significant, it had the opposite effect. I grew. It's a source of nourishment, a spiritual mana. And of course, within this, the noise of the river, the sounds of the river became the sounds of the universe. So I was fortunate enough to be on the bank, perceiving as a separate entity everything. The source of continuation, the non-linear flow of time. So again, being able to experience, just as I acknowledged, enlightened, awakened selfishness, that meant that you had to focus within, go within, only to emerge without. So too, witnessing the river. Now, how, you might ask, if this river is inclusive, if everything is in this river, how am I able to experience it, to witness it, to sit beside it in awe as it flows past? How am I not caught up, swept away? Well, the truth is that there's no escaping. You can't get out of the river. You can't get out of the flow of life, the song of the universe. You can't remove yourself from everything that is, because it's all that you are as well. But sometimes we're granted a perspective. Maybe we cultivate, might be a better word. Maybe we cultivate this ability to stand outside and watch the rhythm, the flow of life. But to what end? Well, as I'm in the midst of it, it's really hard for me to say definitively to what end. Am I experiencing life from outside of life? How is that even possible? I'm not, I can't even begin to guess. I can speculate, but the difference between guessing and speculating is that speculating is founded on more knowledge. You're starting not from point zero, but you're starting from 1 or 2. So you have some accumulated perspective. You have some information and perhaps knowledge. And if you're really lucky, it might be wisdom or a glimpse of wisdom. And again, I ask, to what end? Why would I experience this seeming separation? What would be the end game? Again, at this point, I'm not really sure, but I know that it's in less, I'm experiencing less conflict with the issues of, even though I'm separated, I'm not divided. The consciousness that's sitting on the side of this river, am aware that I'm part and parcel of that river. So again, to what end? All I can say is that this time of discomfort, this time of exclusivity, this time that's divided, that's full, that's preoccupied, that's occupied, is me. Learning to see what? What is it? Where is this process taking me? Process, by definition, has a beginning and an end. And it began for me a few weeks ago. And other than these sharings, I've been isolated. And it's a lot easier to be isolated in these days of social distancing, isn't it? My proclivities to isolation don't seem so antisocial, because we're all being encouraged to experience, maybe for the first time, being antisocial. by quarantine, by putting distance between you and others. So social distancing has become lingua franca of everyone. But what I've been going through is a spiritual distancing. And on a lower by necessity, lower by definition, an emotional isolation. I talked about nature. I talked about cultivating indifference. So I went from cultivating indifference, which was where I started on this current experience that I'm going through, to cultivate indifference, to prepare me for a journey into explaining and sharing why it's not only acceptable but sometimes necessary to focus inward at the expense of everything else. And then I went into about my time for listening to teachers is behind me. And this is not a spiritual ego, it's nothing of the sort. It's just an acceptance that I'm mature enough in my Buddhahood to understand that each of us has our own lens which we see the world. Each of us understand in our own terms. And one is certainly no more valid than the other. But it just comes to time to stand. It came for a time for me to stand on my 2 feet. I had given up seeking validation. And then it just was easy. The next step was that I was secure in what I was experiencing and what I am experiencing and what I'm seeing, and my ability to make it viable, make it understandable to myself. So probably a natural solution is I'm not ready for immersion again. I'm not ready to dive in the river as it sweeps us together all along. There's something, my image, my vision of sitting on the banks of the river, very close to the river, recognizing the allness, the completeness of the river, hearing the music, hearing the sound, hearing the rhythm of the universe, without being immersed. There's still something, this was a reminder that after this inward focus, that life goes on. The big world is out there, bigger than we'll ever know or ever be capable of embracing. Immensity. Immensity beyond our capabilities to even imagine. But yet, the experience was me sitting by the river. So as I look at it from it's still probably too close, but I wanted to do this sharing. I was motivated to share. I wanted to document this process for me, if for no one else, so that I can look back on it and maybe with perspective of what's coming next. So I had to practice, I had to cultivate indifference so that I could immerse myself in a stage of what could be seen as selfishness, because it's all inclusive, inner directed. And from this came the gift of knowing that my time for paying attention, for seeking, for the words of others had come to an end. And it has nothing to do with loss of love, loss of respect. I've never surrendered myself to completely 100% to any teacher or any teaching. I have one man that I call the teacher, and he brought me to the precipice. He brought me to the edge and looked and said simply to me, jump. Jump into the unknown. Because this is the beginnings of the end. There's the beginnings of Buddhahood and the end of searching. It preceded this by many months or a year was the losing the lead, having no need for questioning anything. A man of questions my whole life came to an abrupt end when I just simply ran out of questions. I no longer had any questions. And I mean this sincerely from the deepest recesses of my mind and my body and my spirit and my soul. My questions had been exhausted. And I might add, most of them remained unanswered because I began to understand that they were essentially unanswerable. The big questions are essentially unanswerable, but they serve the purpose of setting you towards freeing you from the confines, the social restrictions that hamper our personal spiritual growth. So the questions disappeared. Now, recently, the need to listen, to read, to be inspired, but predominantly to be validated. That time has come to an end. I'm still reading, and I'm busy reading lots of science fiction. My favorite genre, bar none, always has been and will continue to be. In those times that I'm between the state of awakeness and sleepiness and sleep, I read my little iPad, because it liberates me from keeping books in all the libraries, and I can store so many books on that little machine. But the time to listen to words of others had gone, just as questioning. I'm pretty sure that I gave up seeking before I gave up questioning. That's how vested I was in the questioning process. I remember going through a period of time. It reminds me of Buddha's stories when Buddha gave up. And again, that's a negative connotation, just like awakened selfishness sounds on the surface. But he gave up after trying everything. There's no trying. He just became. It's only after he gave up that he became. In my own humble way, I found this same experience. Somewhere after questioning, I had to give up the spiritual ego, any sense that I was better than anyone else. And this is best practiced through understanding that it's nothing special. It's just so ordinary. Embracing ordinariness. And now I can see the progression, or the change, if you don't like the word progress. The change. And whatever I'm in the throes of, whatever it is that I'm experiencing, I'm not sure. Am I a third into it? Am I halfway? Am I almost? I don't know. And it doesn't really matter, because it's like everything else. It's beyond me. It's beyond, it's outside of, it's in the pale of my job description. But I do feel that before I was excluding by necessity, by definition, by need, through no choice of, I sure didn't make a conscious choice, but I had to experience these steps to somewhere new and different. It's a process, like a caterpillar becoming it's another unfolding. But now, at least, this morning, I woke up with in a place of peace and calmness, where there's been some bit of turmoil. This change hasn't been easy. This change is a revolutionary change from thinking of others well before myself. A lifetime of practicing, of neglecting myself in favor of the big picture of focusing on everyone else and everything else. So this transition, this rejection of behavior that I took for granted, behavior that I misconstrued, I put on a personal level. I thought I was this. And then I found out, even though I was essentially, quietly kicking and screaming as I was forced to take a look at the process that I've been through. I hadn't put words to it. I hadn't gotten my head around it. And it was a process of inclusion to understand the necessities of the things that I previously perhaps spent a lifetime not actively resisting, but passively resisting. And when I say passive, I mean it seemed to me that it was innate. It was the nature of the beast. And not only did I have to go through it, I felt the overpowering urge to share. And that's what I've done in the last 3, this is the 4th, sharing of this time. But maybe the time of tumult, the tumultuous times, may be over. Maybe it's too early to say, but the peace, the contentment, the feeling that everything's okay, sitting on the river, just taking in, just listening and seeing and being. Being separate, I'm still on the riverbank. I'm not in the river, even though it's truly impossible to separate oneself from the river. I'm experiencing the separation for a purpose, but I'm able to see, I'm able to experience. Maybe that I'm understanding that life can continue without me, without any loss whatsoever. So maybe it's more of the experience to embrace my ordinariness, to be humble. But it's brought a sense of peace, a sense of remembering, a sense of acknowledging that life goes on. With or without me, life goes on. And to learn to be whole, to learn to be content, to learn to appreciate this simplicity, this inclusivity of life, even though I'm experiencing it for some purpose as separation. It's just an experience. I'll let you know how it goes.